We are studying the chapter titled The Cosmic Consciousness in Sri Aurobindo's Synthesis of Yoga. He has brought us to this through a series of stages of development in which we have been helped to overcome the limitations of the mind in entering and experiencing the divine consciousness in all its facets, in all the possible experience of oneness, multiplicity, personality, impersonality, and so on. Through that, he pointed out that the full realization requires not only the experience of the passive Brahman, but also the active, the whole manifestation of the universe itself as Brahman, and the realization of these two in a single being. It is to this that the whole journey of the description, both in our understanding and to the extent our mind can absorb in our experience, some perception of our mind. Sri Aurobindo is leading us finally to that experience reconciling these extremes. We have, in summary, in the first paragraph of this chapter, he describes how our normal consciousness is on the surface, living mostly in the mind-created ego, and we can detach from the mind, life and body, get back from this ego personality in which we are habitually living to the one who is the real possessor of the mind, life and body. This is what he refers to as the real individual. The term used is the Jivatman, the individual soul. This first step is well within reach of all of us, and we begin first by dissociating our identification with the body and the senses. Instead of saying, I am a body, I am experiencing pain when there is an injury or hunger, one steps out of that identification. I have a body, it is experiencing pain on the finger or hunger in the stomach. And in the same way, disengaging from the emotions. I have emotions, the emotions come, the emotions go. They surge forward with great intensity, they subside. But I am not the emotions. And then separating from the thoughts. I have thoughts, my thoughts are not very clear. My thoughts are turning in a direction which is not helpful. I would rather think of things more beautiful, and I turn my thoughts. Who is the person turning the thoughts and choosing the thoughts? A center in the mind's awareness. And then from there, one asks the question, where does this awareness come from? What is the source of my I-ness? And one turns still deeper and comes to some perception of an essential, pure consciousness that we are. We feel it immortal, permanent, free. But its essential experience is still of a center, a personality. And so he points to this first step, detaching from the identification with the mind, life, and body, get back from his ego to the consciousness of the true individual, the Jivatman, who is the real possessor of mind, life, and body. And then from here comes a second step. From here one looks back. What is it that this Jivatman represents? There is something greater. And so looking back from this individual to that of which it is the representative and conscious figure, he can get back to the transcendent consciousness of the pure self. And so this poise of the transcendent consciousness of pure self represents one extreme of the silent Brahman. The other extreme is this movement of the world of which my mind, life, body is a small part. Between these two extremes, he points out, between the movement of universal nature and this transcendent existence, possessor of the one and cosmic self of the other is the cosmic consciousness, the universal Purusha, of whom all nature is the Prakriti or active conscious force. So this is where the cosmic consciousness comes, which experiences the full spectrum from that extreme to this extreme as one continuum, one being. And the being may have two aspects, as the Purusha, observing, witnessing consciousness, and the movement of the Prakriti, which is the energy of that consciousness, but still it is one being in between. When he describes this, he says, possessor of the one and cosmic self of the other. This consciousness is the self of the cosmos. And so it is this poise that the whole chapter dwells upon. And he describes how we can arrive at this through two processes. One is this breaking of the walls of the ego, widen the consciousness stage by stage. The other is identifying oneself in the oneness with all existences, with the pure self, in the absolute existence, and from there experiencing the full outgoing movement that embraces the universe, becomes the universe. And these are two, let's say, different paths. The approach generally he has been focusing upon in the text and in the previous chapter is this initially taking a concentrated leap into this pure self, and then from there widening out to embrace the universe. Now, how exactly this is to be done is the portion we are studying, where we have been through two stages. In the first stage, he says that the foundation for this cosmic consciousness can most easily be laid by the mental being when it identifies with the immanent, silent self in all. It becomes a witness, pure, omnipresent regarding all activities of the universe from this center, which is like the soul of the cosmos. But this poise is the foundation, and it's the first stage in which one concentrates. Now, as a practice, one can begin with this even without having sufficiently established oneself either in the true personality, the true individual, the Jivatman, or even without having realized that greater poise of the absolute consciousness, pure self. Even as we are as mental beings, one can begin to perceive this, the sense of the presence of the silent self, which is in everything. It can take two forms. One is to feel it as an impersonal something, almost like the substance of space, And Sri Aurobindo has discussed earlier, one should not stop with that. One should know it also as transcending the space, transcending time. That's when one begins to perceive its true character. But still, like an ethereal expanse, filling everything. The other approach, which is more natural in the practice of the integral yoga, is to know it as the presence of the Divine Mother, who is everywhere. From there, the aspect of the power of the Mother in forming things becomes also easy. But you first recognize this stillness, this silence, this immanence like a support, like the soul, soul of the cosmos. Satchidananda, for whose delight universal nature displays the eternal procession of her works. So this initial poise has to be stabilized, and particularly dwelling on the silence is what gives it the stability. One could hurry up the process, skip the stage before it is fully developed, and concentrate on the mother's presence in all things, knowing also her activity, her movement, her play. It is she in the flower who gives it the beautiful color in the rose, or the beautiful shade here, or the perfume there, and everything is her play in substance, expressing her powers, her qualities. One could move to that rapidly. But if this foundation is not stable enough, one can easily lose the permanence of this realization. It will be there momentarily while the mind dwells on it, perhaps even somewhat superficial, but one loses it quickly when the mind moves to other things, because it's only a part of the mind which is perceiving this. Instead, when one dwells on the stillness and silence of the self, which is immanent, it grows rapidly deep, almost becomes tangible, so dense indeed that one becomes a part of it, one is living in it. And then when one moves from there into the perception of the movement, then that is never lost. So what Sri Aurobindo is mapping out here can be approached in two ways. One is to follow literally, step by step, going in and stabilizing it before one moves on. To give it, of course, the most obvious and complete solidity. Or one can, as one reads, let the mind begin to perceive, to whatever extent, to whatever shallowness or depth that our consciousness is capable of. We begin to perceive, to feel, and to immerse ourselves in this experience. But then we come back again and again, and each time a little deeper and a little deeper. So this being a foundation, he says this foundation enables us to possess in the security of the divine existence the whole universe within our own being. Because when you are dwelling on this thing which is immanent and you begin to feel yourself one with it, where are you? Unlike the little personality who is in here, in this little center in the head, looking out, the universe is around me. When you're identified with an expanse of this wide consciousness, where are you? You feel yourself equally everywhere. Whereas the universe feels as if within you. It is in the second paragraph of the chapter, middle of the second paragraph. And you feel yourself as if holding the whole universe, in some sense, within you. As this deepens and becomes more complete, of course, the entire universe is felt as oneself. And so he says, this is a foundation. It gives you the security of the divine existence. In the security of the divine existence, the whole universe within ourselves. There is no more that sense of limitation of being shut up in this little container of mind, life and body. We are, he says, not mind or life or body, but the informing and sustaining soul, silent, peaceful, eternal, that possesses them. And this soul we find everywhere. sustaining and informing and possessing all lives and minds and bodies, and cease to regard it as separate and individual being in our own. So this becomes the completion of this first step, where it is the same consciousness in all things, in all beings. In it, all this moves and acts. Within all this, it is stable and immutable. Now, in this, of course, he describes how there is a deep, unwounded delight because of this, the freedom that comes, the delight which is there, cannot be tainted by the experiences of the surface, emotions, thoughts, or sensations. Now, in this is the first sense of a stable being. I will describe it like this. The experience we have from in here looking out is reversed. We have the sense of being as if everywhere, and here is a focal point, this body. Here is another focal point, that body, these forms. Everything is as if felt within. As an exercise, and as a first mental glimpse of what this is like, try to observe your life as if watching from above, separate from your little personality, looking at the whole journey of your day and your days and years, as if a third person presiding over this whole journey of life. And in your mind, a part of you detaches watching from above. Or extend it a little more, what does the universe look when it looks at you? What does the universe see of your life? So put yourself in the poise of the whole universe, feeling everything inside it, and here is this one little individual wandering, and the journey of this life. And a part of your mind gets into that poise. At that stage, you notice, where are you? It's the perspective of the universe. You're everywhere. Individual life, one little wandering trail. Lives, each one a separate wandering trail. And your perspective is like that, all-inclusive, all-embracing. This gives us a first mental feel of what it's like. And one can dwell on this, remain in this kind of an attitude or poise in relation to your life and to things in the universe. And very quickly, it's as if this sense of the silent self, immanent, dawns on you. The first step of the emergence of the cosmic consciousness begins to form. I have known of people who have taken this up as an exercise, not knowing what they were doing, and one could feel in them a complete shift in the consciousness. So this is accessible to us even as we are. There are many approaches in which one can enter into this first foundation. But having this, it's not enough, because we have still to embrace the whole movement, and it must become one being. So the next step Sri Aurobindo describes in the next paragraph, the third paragraph now. Next, we have to realize this silent self is the Lord of all the action of universal nature. The same self-existent displayed in the creative force of its eternal consciousness. So while here earlier it was this silent, conscious awareness, the aspect of the Sat, of the Satchidananda, now comes the aspect of the consciousness and its creative force. All this action is only His power and knowledge and self-delight, going abroad in His infinite being to do the works of His eternal wisdom and will. So already in that first base, there is this whole space that is His own body, in the silence, in the stillness. But now it is His awareness, energy, power, knowledge, moving, pouring into what? In His own being. Everything is moving now. Emerging out of that silence, the consciousness puts out its power and its knowledge. So, and then we realize the divine, the eternal self of all, first at the source of all action and inaction, of all knowledge and ignorance, of all delight and suffering, of all good and evil, perfection and imperfection, of all force and form, of all the outgoing of nature from the eternal divine principle, and of all the return of nature towards the divine. So this becomes the theme of the meditation, where everything is seen as emerging out of this to this. And not only in each form, the flower itself, where did it come from? It emerged out of that silence by the creative consciousness, its power and its knowledge that formed this flower, and then the flower fizzled out and returned into that. The tree emerged out of this, burst out, and over a few centuries eventually broke down, returned into that. Everything is emerging out of that, subsiding into that. And it is in this that we build the relationship with nature. All that we experience as nature is nothing but this outpouring and this returning. And you see here a kind of a first contact, a first link is established. Then he says, we realize it next as itself going abroad in its power and knowledge. For the power and knowledge are itself not only the source of their works, but the creator and doer of their works, one in all existences. So this becomes the next stage. Not only it was from his consciousness that the power and knowledge emerged, it is himself as power and knowledge that is moving out, pouring to become everything. So when the flower bursts out of the tree, it is the divine himself moving out to become flower, and then moving back. And this you can see, focus on each individual form, and at some point one can perceive of the whole universe as this. All nature is him moving forward to become all that, and returning into himself, and pouring out, and returning into himself. And you see here now already a continuity of the divine himself becoming this. From the silence where it was observing, he now becomes and is the doer. And in that consciousness, in this perception, everything that is being done by nature is his working. So when you see the universe bursting out, it is himself as body and form of universe. When you see the planets being formed, it is himself as body of planet. When you see life emerging, it is himself coming forward to express more and more, and so on. In our own body, we touched upon this last time and we paused around here. Every cell and its working is himself doing his work. Now, in the particular form of the integral yoga, as Sri Aurobindo formulates it, we see this much more easily as his power, the Divine Mother. But it is himself as power. She works in our body, forming each cell, sustaining each cell, and even destroying each cell when its time is over, to be replaced by a new one, or to be renewed again and again. And the sustenance of all the harmonious working of your body is his harmony, her harmony expressed. Now think of it this way. As long as it is his harmony perfectly expressed, the working is perfect. When that same harmony is imperfectly expressed, then the problems come, health, illness. But it is still his doing, her working. And here we continue the text where we had paused last time. It is the same one who is creator and doer in all existences. Now what happens is, when the bee approaches the flower, it is the same divine in the bee, the same divine in the flower. And therefore, being the same divine, he knows exactly how to align each to meet the other. One of the things we notice when we observe evolution and nature's working, everything is so perfectly designed. The tiniest detail has a purpose and is optimized with everything else in oneself and in relation to the universe. When the bee approaches the flower, there are actually marks on the flower's surface, which are seen only by the bee. We do not see it. Our eyes do not see in ultraviolet. The bee sees. And there are certain markings which indicate where the bee must go to get the pollen. When the perfume spreads from the flower and the bee smells the perfume, in the very contact with the perfume, it knows from where the perfume comes. And the inner intelligence inside the bee knows which kind of flower and what kind of nourishment it will give. And so if there is a mix of many flowers, the bee is attracted to the one flower which is most important for its nourishment. And all the bees of the hives are each going to different flowers, and in the sum total, the hive gets the full nourishment that it needs because of that divine intelligence in the hive consciousness, which gives to each bee its own unique task, and yet in the whole, all the complete experience of nourishment is drawn in. And if you look at the forest and its relation with the hive, again there is a perfect harmony and alignment. Why? Because it is the same divine in each one of them. It holds that intelligence, it knows itself in all other forms, and therefore is in perfect alignment in everything. So, he says, for we realize it next as itself going abroad in its power and knowledge. For the power and knowledge are itself, not only the source of their works, but the creator and doer of their works in all existences. One in all existences. For the many souls of the universal manifestation are only faces of the one divine. The many minds, lives, bodies are only his masks and disguises. Now comes the completion of this picture. Within each bee, the soul of the bee, the essence of its individuality, is the same one divine putting forward a special front, a special face, and in the other bee, a special face. In the flower, a different special face. In the gardener, a different special face. Each is a face of the divine. But if the soul is the face, what is the mind, life and body? They are masks. And this is the beauty of this image. The many minds, lives and bodies are only his masks and disguises. Why? Because as the body, mind and life is formed, they do not reveal the divinity. The divinity is revealed in the soul, but not in these layers. At least not yet. Because they are first expressions emerging in evolution, led by the soul, which is the divine himself, in its face. So we have a very interesting picture now. The whole universe is made of, or its working is formed of, the many faces of the one divine, each face covered with 3 layers of masks, disguises, hiding, concealing what it actually is. If you recall in Savitri, he uses this phrase, a vast disguise conceals the divine. I don't have the exact line, but the phrasing is a vast disguise conceals. And what you're seeing here is each soul as a face of the divine with this triple disguise, mask. But now you can see all the masks in each level separately. The mask of the material world, the mask of the life energies, the mask of the mind forms. And behind that, the one soul of the divine. So you can see it universally as the divine in its triple disguise, or in each form you can see separately the face of the divine as the soul with a triple disguise. For the many souls of the universal manifestation are only faces of the one divine. The many minds, lives, bodies are only his masks and disguises. Now, what's the distinction between mask and disguise? If Sri Aurobindo uses a word, you have to see why. The mask covers, it can be unintentional or it can be intentional. But the disguise not only covers, reveals something other than what I am. And here comes the interesting part of the play, therefore. The face within might be a face of delight and bliss. But the mask covers the bliss. The disguise can put up a front, surprise, put up a front of hurt, put up a front of excitement, sadness, and all the variations. And they are disguises. Behind each, at the essence of each, is the one delight, playing in so many different shades, colors, forms of the play of delight. It is this idea which is articulated in the Indian tradition of theatre as rasa, the sap, the delight, the juice behind the emotional experience. And so they will speak of navarasa, 9 distinct moods of the play. Now, any story that you may create is incomplete unless it has all 9. There are various ways of categorizing them. You can call them 9, 12, 6. But there's something approximately around that number which are majorly distinguishable. For example, happiness, sadness, surprise, fear, love, and so on. Each of these represents a major aspect of the experience when an individual relates to the universe. And your life is not complete unless you have had a full experience. The play, the drama, is not complete unless it expresses all of these. And we wonder why. It's almost as if the divine wants to play out the full spectrum of possibilities through each form and in each relationship. If there is an experience of affection, take a story of romance. The romance is somehow not complete unless there is a misunderstanding, some separation, some break, after which there is a deeper unity on a higher level. And the sense of growth which comes with that. So, we see something quite fascinating. In the play of possibilities of the various masks, the disguises give to it a full spectrum of the play. And it's as if through each form the divine wants to play out that spectrum. If something is missing, then it's almost as if things arrange themselves to compel that missing experience, however briefly. And then you can look back at your life, and you know people who have done everything they wanted to do in their life, they look back and say, you know, I have led a complete life. There's nothing I have not done, there's nothing I have not experienced. And you're happy about it. When in the midst of the life and the problems of life where you hit certain extremes of different shades of experience, you say, oh, I'm going through intense suffering, oh, I'm going through intense whatever it is. But at the end when you look back, you say, oh yes, I've had it all and it's been complete. So in this suggestion of the play of disguises is this idea that something of the nature of the play requires the deliberate concealment for the purpose of the full play. And you see another thing here. The divine moves forward and puts on these masks and disguises. In order to what? Play in his own game with himself of this hide and seek. For what purpose? Somewhere along the way you see the nature of the play is the unveiling of the masks. The removing of the cover of the disguise to discover that which it conceals. And we naturally tend to think of it, because it reminds us of that, as a game of hide and seek. You know, children play, we have all played in our childhood in the game of hide and seek. Everybody goes and hides, one person is left looking for everyone else. And for a while he has to cover his eyes. Otherwise the game cannot begin. If you're already looking, you will see where everyone hides, isn't it? So you have to cover your eyes. In other words, you willingly become blind to the reality of things. You see? And that is the first movement of the involution, where the divine willingly enters the experience of darkness and self-loss. And the whole universe is as if born in this darkness of empty space, no forms, nothing expressed. And then you count up to 10, 100, whatever it is. Then you remove the covering. And the covering removed, you begin to look. Now the process of removal of covering itself is graded. So in the first emergence out of that darkness is the consciousness. Where am I? Who am I? What is all this around me? You see, if you took the game of hide and seek to its extreme, not only everybody is hiding, but everything has been changed around you. You don't recognize anything of the scenery. You see, they make variations. You get a person blindfolded, spin them around so they don't know which direction, move them elsewhere. When you open your eyes, you're surprised by something which is totally unfamiliar to you. And then you begin the quest to discover, remove covering, of everything around, and then of yourself. Who am I? Because you're a part of this game. Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I looking for? And if everything is so well hidden, you do not even know where they are hiding, but who is hiding. Because that also is forgotten in the covering of the sight. That's when the game has its most intense delight. And as you play, you catch somebody. Oh, you were hiding here. Caught you. And you see the delight in the children when somebody catches. They burst out laughing. I have found you. But the other side, the person, you found me. And if your game goes on too long, some people are so well hidden that they are not found. You'll notice after a while they get bored. So they come out a little more so that they can be found. They move out to a different hiding location so that the play may take place. So behind it all, in the midst of this play of masks, the 9 saps of the play, behind it is the delight, which is the essence of all the saps. And it is for that delight that the whole play is being played out. If not for the delight, this would be meaningless. But the delight is revealing itself through these 9 or more colors. And through the play of colors, the complexity of the delight is increasing. The mother makes this distinction between 2 words: bliss of oneness and bliss of union. She says the divine in himself is experiencing oneness and already has the bliss of that oneness, in which he knows himself completely. Nothing is hidden, including all his, everything is revealed. And it is blissful. But she says there is a greater in union. They are 2 different, unknown to each other, move to unite. And then there is a rich exploration and bursting of these of oneself and of the other. And she says it is to experience the bliss of union that the universe was created. In other words, the divine goes out to become universe, losing himself, concealing, self-concealing, hiding from himself, forgetting himself, and then returning to what? To himself. The whole universe with all the complexities. And each of these now approaches each fiber of your experiences the divine differently. And There is a rich mingling and an extraordinary richness of the bliss of union in all the steps and stages of the union and all the facets of the union. In the yogic tradition, in the symbolic language, they speak of 72,000 gopis uniting with the Lord Krishna. And the number gives you the hint of what it symbolizes. You see, the gopis generally represent the human soul who are uniting with the Lord. And it's a union of bliss. 72,000, in the Ayurveda, they will speak of 72,000 nerves of our human body. In other words, in our whole being, every fiber of our awareness is like the gopi. And in each fiber of our awareness, we meet the Lord uniquely and differently. And so the sense is, as we journey, every step of our growth, of our evolution, beginning from the zero, every step is a discovery of the Lord, of ourselves, of the Lord within us, and of the Lord outside us. And every step is a further shade of the delight where the mask and the disguise is a little removed and a little removed and a little removed. And so the journey is made as slow and gradual as possible so that you may experience all the facets of the delight and play out every interrelated aspect of the play. Instead of moving straight back when you'd finish the game too soon and with not enough richness of diversity. So mother's comment, she says, nature thinks I am too slow. Nature thinks I am too fast, too much in a hurry, and I think nature is too slow. So in mother's work, in helping to complete this breakthrough of the awakening of the consciousness and the awakening to the new world, manifestation of the new consciousness, of the revealed divinity, nature wanted to go slower. Why are you in a hurry, she says. Let's enjoy each step. And mother said, no, but you cannot stay so long in this. You have to move faster. And so there is this struggle. Who is making the struggle? It's the divine taking two poises. One poise which wants to explore the full possibility of rich, fine, tiny variations. And another possibility, which is still the divine, which wants to push forward as rapidly as possible. And between the two is this complex play of evolution. Now all of this is suggested by this word masks and disguises. And here in this description is how you see the deeper truth of the universal play. This he now brings more overtly. We perceive each being to be the universal Narayana, presenting to us many faces. We lose ourselves in that and perceive our own mind, life and body as only one presentation of the self. And all whom we formerly conceived of as others are now, to our consciousness, ourself in other minds, lives and bodies. So here the full focus is on conscious beings. You see, earlier what he described was much more general. All mind, lives and bodies are his masks and disguises. So if you look at the flower, you have the life, you do not have the mind so much, but life and body, yes. If you look at the stone, you have only the body, you do not see life and mind. But they're all disguises, masks. But now he is looking at each being, conscious being, to be the universal Narayana presenting to us many faces. Now this is one of the interesting things in the Sanskrit language. The vocabulary used to refer to the divine. So many names. You just spoke of Brahman, you spoke of Purusha, you spoke of Atman, you spoke of Vishnu, Shiva, Deva, you have the Bhagavan. These are terms used to describe In English language, you'll say God. Why so many words? Each representing a particular aspect in the context of the relationship which you want to highlight. Bhagavan is particularly the one who enjoys, the divine as the enjoyer of the cosmos. Isha is the divine as Lord, enjoyer, but his lordship is highlighted. When you say Deva, it is light, consciousness, awareness lit up, utterly aware. When you say Brahman, it is the totality of the all in the oneness. When you say Purusha, it is the poise which supports. And so each takes a particular aspect of the relationship. Narayana has a special meaning. And you know, it is the Nara and Narayana are kept always as a couple. The Nara is the human. Narayana is the one who lives within the Nara, who is omnipresent, immanent, as the divine living in all beings. And so it is this particular aspect that is highlighted when he uses this term universal Narayana, presenting to us many faces. The divine as the inhabitant within all beings. In the Buddhist terminology, they give great importance to all sentient beings. The whole focus there is on getting free of suffering. And so you pray for all sentient beings to be freed from suffering. In the process, you're of course ignoring the non-sentient things. They're not beings. And this distinction is important because practically, when we relate to the universe, we do first relate to all conscious beings. They may not be so conscious, but they feel something. So we may say, for example, the flower, is it a sentient being? Yes, if it feels, if it responds, yes, it's a sentient being. The stone we may not in the category of sentient being. But more than the flower, the tree might be more conscious. Or between the worm of seeing Narayana in all things. And he speaks of seeing Narayana in the wall, in the line of ants which was moving, in the trees, in the sky, everywhere it is Narayana. So at that point, the distinction between sentient and non-sentient is not so strong. Everything is form and expression of him as conscious being. The soul and the essence living in each one. We lose ourselves in that and perceive our own mind, life and body as only one presentation of the self. So all the others we used to see earlier as that is different, he is someone else, I am me, not them. So instead I see all whom we formerly conceived of as others are now to our consciousness ourself in other minds, lives and bodies. This experience we do have often in certain close relationships. A mother with her child will often feel herself in the child, at least initially. Afterwards, the child rebels and pushes her out, but still, initially, there is this sense of being in the other. And what happens to the other is as vividly felt as if happening to oneself. Very useful experience to break free of the narrow ego sense. But the same thing happens as we grow a little more plastic and more wide in our personality, when we begin to identify with the pains and troubles of others. Sometimes the work requires it. A doctor needs to feel what it is that you're referring to. So partial identification must take place. Or if you wish to communicate with a friend and help them, you have to get into their experience to appreciate what they're trying to convey. And so we do make these partial identifications where we feel as they would, or we feel ourselves in their suffering. Or if you meet somebody who has been through the same problem, who's going through the same problem that you've been through, you can say, oh, I identify perfectly with you. I've been through exactly the same thing. And for a moment there, a part of you feels that is myself now experiencing their struggle in them. So these things keep popping up. Because the reality is, this is the underlying truth. And all of our sense of separation is only an artificially imposed barrier. The truth always leaks out through the barrier. Every now and then we experience these identifications. I've seen people taking sometimes to semi-monastic lives. After a while, inevitably, you will find them connecting to something, someone, even if it is pets. Sometimes spending hours with the pets because they need to feel themselves in the other. Otherwise, the reality of the experience is not complete. One has to always break out of our narrowness, which is a falsehood. So, we lose ourselves in that and perceive our own mind, life, and body as only one presentation of the self, and all whom we formerly conceived of as others are now to our consciousness, ourself, in other minds and lives and bodies. Now remember that earlier thing we spoke of, where you conceive of yourself or see from the perspective of the universe, your life and others' lives. In that experience, very quickly, you realize there's nothing special particular to this life. Each one of them you're equally responsible for or equally relating to. Perhaps with some special connection here simply because of a past habit. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa has, of course, unusual expressions in his life. In one of them, he was observing a bullock being whipped. Spontaneously, there was an identification with the suffering of the bullock. But the identification was so complete, not just one of the inner consciousness, but even in the physical body and the life energy, that as the bullock was being whipped, he began to cry out in pain, feeling the pain of the bullock. And on his body, the marks of the whip appeared. But this is the reality, because we are the bullock that is being whipped. Even as we may whip it, we are whipping ourselves. We're not conscious of it, that's all. Because of the separation created by the masks and disguises. But the reality is, even as we harm another, we are only harming ourselves. We do not know it. Somewhere inside us, we experience the impact of that harm. Somewhere inside us, something within us and back. This is the reason why you will find you cannot take that harm beyond a certain point if the inner being is somewhat awake. There are many interesting experiments done in the lab where people were asked to torture somebody else, as if by giving electric shocks, pushing a button. On the other side was an actor. And as the intensity of the shock is supposedly increased, the actor puts out stronger and stronger cries. Now what is interesting is, a normal person, seeing that whole experience, will shrink back. He's suffering so much, I can't do this more. But then what they did in the lab was, they said, all right, do a little bit, increase a little bit. And when the push was made slowly, bit by bit, a person would be willing to go very far. So what has been done here is, you're asked to separate yourself in consciousness. The identification which would spontaneously take place is artificially enhanced. And then after that, bit by bit, as the intensity is increased, that identification hardens. Because something in you feels uncomfortable, and to not feel uncomfortable, you harden it. Until at some point you find a person behaving in ways which are inhuman without even realizing that he has been led to that point. And how was this possible? Because of the hardening of the mask separating. Now let the person be kept away for a while, and then brought back to the same environment and be exposed directly to a rapid increase of the pain, he will immediately react. Why? Because this hardening is not going to last. It must thin out gradually, because that's not the truth of things. So inevitably, either spontaneously one comes back to what is closer to our normal habit, or life beats us. There are people who have a strong sense of insularity. They don't feel much others' emotions or hurt. But eventually life creates a situation where you experience the same thing which you did to another. And when it comes back and hits you, something inside remembers that. Now you may say it is karma. You may say it is yourself who received those beatings in the other now, which is awakening inside you. Whatever form it is. Somewhere that connection is made and you realize, oh, this is what it is. And after that, it's as if that hard layer of insularity drops. And you feel, you connect more. So the whole process of the play of life, although beginning with masks and disguises, the whole process is one of rubbing off of the masks and disguises. Every contact wears out a little more. A thinner layer is removed until gradually that which is within comes forward, more and more revealed. But here in this consciousness, we see all these ourselves in other forms, other minds and lives and bodies. The minds and lives and bodies are different, but it's our consciousness, ourself in each one that is revealed now. And then he takes it to a more essential level, not just sentient beings. All force and idea and event and figure of things in the universe are only manifest degrees of this self, values of the divine in his eternal self-figuration. Now this is a more complex or more complete perception. You see, he is always taking you from that which is most easily experienced to that which is most complete. Here, it's going beyond the beings, all force, idea, event, and figure of things in the universe. So first we see forces. Between these two, let's say, individuals, there's a force, pulling, pushing, energies. That you can say, yes, these are just forces which are only the same working now, pulling, pushing. What is it that he describes them to be? Manifest degrees of this self, values of the divine in his self. So the self revealing its degrees is what you're seeing as the play of the forces. When, for example, you have you push a stone, push it with a certain force. You only exercised your awareness and the force of your awareness. Who exercised it? But actually behind the scenes, it is the divine, which is the only thing real, right? Everything else is only mask. So through the mask, the divine has exercised a push. You remove me from the picture, and you find a stone slipping from the mountain and falling and colliding with another stone. What's the difference? It's still that concealed power, intelligence within pushing, exercising. All forces, all pushes, all pulls are a play of that. Next level, all idea. You have in your mind a certain idea, let's say, of something you can do. The idea itself, the knowledge itself is like a form, a possibility, an image forms in your mind. This is what I will do. This is what I will make it happen. And that idea is itself an image of a possibility, which is what he describes here. Manifest degrees of the self or values of the divine in his self-figuration. When the divine conceives of himself, oh, this form, that form. Each idea is a form of his own self-seeing, self-being. Values of what he can be, more revealed or less revealed. Take a concept, an idea of Auroville. When mother conceived of it first, nobody knew of it. It's not spoken. It's unmanifest in human minds. To her consciousness, she saw it already. So you will recall, we have heard from mother's attendant, Pranabda, when she would drive down to the north of Pondicherry, she would have the car stopped and stare out over what were at that time just barren land, ravines cut into red soil from the rains. She would stop and stay there for a while and then go on. And so once he asked, Mother, what do you do? Why are you stopping here and looking here? So she said, one day there will be a big city which will form here. Now here in that statement, something which she saw, which was waiting, has been given a first form of expression. So he thinks, okay, big city, what does it mean? In his consciousness, the whole thing is not yet seen. Eventually though, when mother conceives of and formulates the whole concept of the township, what it is meant to be, what it is meant to represent, at that point she is articulating that which is already waiting to happen. Okay? So on one level, that idea itself is a possibility of the divine seeing in himself. Here, I will express as this. On the other side, it is this possibility which is being captured in small bits. An idea, a city, and the idea is a partial expression. The city of dawn, city of human unity. Now this is revealing more. Okay? A city of human unity where everything will be a learning experience. Will be type for other cities, which will embody the possibility of future human living. Now you see, the same idea has acquired greater manifestation. So when manifest degrees of this self, the same thing could come out in different degrees and you would see it at different, or their self-figurations, the way images himself and many ways in which he images himself, and progressively revealing values of the divine in his eternal self-figuration. This is what an idea is finally, isn't it? This is what a force is finally, isn't it? So here in the domain of ideas, every idea is a self-figuration of the divine, revealed to partial degrees or greater degrees or more degrees. Each one of us and our life is an idea of the divine, wanting to work out a line of experience and development of himself. You can see this across lives. Here is a special line of development, developing across so many lives, developing these possibilities, coming to where you are now, and continuing across further lives. Or you can see within this lifetime, there was a particular idea of what is to be experienced here in this life, and it's a partial idea of that larger idea. So different degrees, ideas emerge, but behind all this you may say it is the one idea of the divine knowing himself purely as all things he can be, the most complete idea of himself, right? So every idea is as if himself revealed partially in the many ways in which he could see himself unfolding in that game of hide and seek, where the layers are removed and things are more and more revealed. So all forces, all ideas. And the third is all events. Everything that happens in the universe is nothing but this thing which was so far a force and an idea, now taking concrete form in an arrangement of things, more and more revealed or less revealed. So there's an event which was supposed to happen. It almost happened but missed. What would you say to that? It's still a partial revealing of the self, manifest degrees of the self, right? So when mother speaks of the effort made in Egypt, and that's not the only effort, there have been other efforts before in other spaces also, including in India. But she refers to that particularly as a special effort which was made, which she described as the prototype for the idea of Auroville. Now, this is when the king, you will recall the name, Akhenaten, conceived of this new religion with the sun as the center, bringing back the unity of the divine consciousness, discarding the many specialized facets which had become somewhat degraded, and conceived of a new city which would live by its standards, by its values. A city in which a new consciousness, a new truth could be manifested and revealed entirely, not concealed, not the confused human living. True spiritual collective realization. And Mother refers to that and says it was meant to be one of the prototypes, attempts, which was destined to fail, but was necessary because you had to keep alive the ideal. If you think about what this means, an ideal is there and the idea of the ideal, okay? And it's trying to enter into the earth's domain to take form as an event. And a little bit, like a tip of the iceberg, pokes into the human domain of events. Briefly pokes and is pushed back. Briefly pokes in a little more, is pushed back. Now what's happening, if you look at the unfolding in time, this ideal is waiting. If you push it back and it does not get a chance to manifest, people will forget, and the connection from the ideal to humanity would be lost. So every now and then a situation has to be created where the ideal can come in a little more. But humanity is not ready for it to be fully realized. So it has to be lost, or pushed back at least. But the failure of the ideal is what is ensuring its eventual success. By the very fact that each time it comes in, it imprints itself more, prepares humanity more, until humanity will be sufficiently ready, and then the full thing could come through. Of course, the full thing doesn't happen in a year. It's taken 50 years, and the ideal has poked in a little more, and over the next 50 years, maybe a little more, to the extent human beings can receive. But here's an occasion where we grow in human evolution, collectively and individually. We grow, and each time we make possible a greater expression of that ideal. But what is that ideal? It's really the divine himself, conceiving of himself in this form, in this particular event. Now you look at all events are nothing but expressions of the divine in the way he could conceive of himself. I could be like this, I could be like that. Every event is just that. But every event is partially more or less expressed of a possibility, which is himself the divine. You see here, already your mind has been brought into a very different way of looking at the universe. It was easy enough to look at the universe as people within whom it is the divine Narayana who lives, and so all our play of relationships is Narayana playing through masks. It is I, myself in all things. Now he has extended it to the forces working, pushing, pulling, arranging, compelling. Then extending it to ideas which are manifesting, and then events which are happening. And it's as if these events have nothing to do with the people. The events are themselves the divine projecting himself, manifesting, and people as if coalesce around the events to make them inevitable. I'm coming back to the example of Auroville because it is something so powerful as an event, so powerful even as the idea behind, so powerful as the force behind. It's a wonderful example to explore. When Mother projected that, brought it and expressed, articulated it, people were attracted, completely breaking their rational thought. I know of a couple, and I've mentioned this before, a couple, 2 children living in America. They looked at a newspaper item, the city of the future, and a short note, nothing more, inauguration of Auroville, city of the future. And both the parents said, this is it, this is where we will go. And they sold off all their belongings with their 2 children who were barely 3 and 5, came here to a place which was still a desert. What pulls them? The call of the soul that recognizes, this. From when? From all the previous occasions that it has attempted to participate and has participated in those partial efforts and in those so-called failures. And it calls and awakes, and these are the people who come. For what? They don't even know it. Their minds, the masks are still very rigid. But something is cutting through the masks. And the event compels itself. The point I'm getting at is people, as if, are pulled into the mold of the event to have it happen when the event carries its own power and force. In the same way as an idea can enter into you, seize your mind and turn your mind to articulate it. You didn't think up the idea. The idea found in you a vehicle to express itself. In the same way as a force pushes you, you didn't choose to get pushed. It pushed you, right? So in this sequence of phrases he uses, he is going very deep into this experience of seeing all as the divine. Not only in the forms, not only in the forces pushing, which is also the divine progressively expressing himself, but also in the ideas and in the events. And then finally at the fourth stage, he gives to it a more concrete form and figure of things. Now this is a more sophisticated concept. Things, well, these are all things. What is figure of things? The suggestion in the vocabulary is when things happen, there's something which is like an overall framework. Okay, let's say, or a will. The details, if you erase, what is the broad concept of what it represents? The broad direction in which things are moving, that would be the figure of things. Within it you could get lost in specifics, and the specifics are completely free for the play, predictable. But that through those this would emerge, that's the things. Wrote 100 years ago that India has to, for the work in humanity, which is a larger part of the evolution of humanity. You could, who would be the agents? Because that's in the realm of the free play. There would be agents who might come up and fail, and others would be created, and or many failures. We don't know. The specifics are not important. The overall, this drift, that eventually this breakthrough has to take place, eventually it has to take this form, and the awakening must happen. That's the sense of the figure of things. So it's like when you draw a cartoon, you don't draw every single hair. You don't draw every eyelash. It's not a skillful painting, or it's not a photograph. It's a cartoon. For the simple reason, it captures only the figure of things. The suggestion of the arc of the head, the curve, and you have the suggestion of the hair, and that's it. That's the sense of the figure of things. So in what he's saying is, all forces and idea and event and figure of things in the universe. The way the divine acts to manifest, it takes on this overall turn of the figure of things. Are only, they're nothing else, they are only manifest degrees of this self. This self manifesting in greater and greater degrees. And values the divine in his eternal self-figuration. So what's coming? Because there are many forces, many ideas, many events, many unfolding figures of things. The degrees of the self are really values of the divine in his eternal self-figuration. As the divine turns and knows himself, all the possibilities in which he perceives himself, everything that can happen, out of that, the things emerging, the values that he experiences himself to be, come forward in different degrees. The whole universe is just that and nothing else. And you will see here at this point, we have something very similar to the vision that Sri Krishna gives to Arjuna when he reveals himself entirely. Arjuna sees him in this extraordinary, complete vision where everything that exists in time, all the forms, all the figures, all the gods, all the demons, all the events, everything is seen the one divine unfolding relentlessly. Nothing can stop because everything is himself. Even what opposes him is himself playing through a mask or through a disguise. And since it is he who is opposing, he can choose when the opposition ceases or in what way the opposition is used to make more perfect his forward movement. So there's only one relentless forward march. And therefore he sees him as time unrolling, devouring, creating and devouring all that he creates and compelling without opposition. This is so overwhelming to him because the consciousness seeing it is still one little mind in one little life and body. He gets overwhelmed and says, okay, enough now. Please shut down this vision and show yourself in your four-armed form. Interesting suggestion there. You know, the familiar image you will see of Vishnu with four arms, with the conch shell, with the discus, with the mace, and with the lotus. Four arms holding like this. So he says, come back to that. That is more acceptable and containable. The rest is too overwhelming. But this is really the sense of the perception that everything is divine. There's nothing which is not essentially divine, but playing through masks and disguises. But even the masks and disguises are himself, remember. Thus, viewing things and beings, we may see them first as if they were parts and parcels of his divided being. But the realization and the knowledge are not complete unless we go beyond this idea. So the first step when you experience, remember the mind always to see things in, even when that which you're seeing is one whole ocean, your mind still fixates on a ripple, a crest of foam, another wave, and so on. Because that's the way the mind works. It cannot hold one continuum without reducing it to pieces. So the first step, even as we see this, everything is the divine working through so many forms. We may see them first as if they were parts and parcels of his divided being. So divine as flower, divine as bee, divine as plant, divine as gardener, divine as air, divine as perfume, divine as force pushing the wind, divine as idea of the garden, divine as event of this season, whatever form it takes. But they're all different faces, aspects. His being is as if divided. A little bit in the flower, a little bit in the bee, a little bit in the wind. That's how the mind would tend to conceive. Okay? But the realization and the knowledge are not complete unless we go beyond this idea of quality and space and division and see the infinite everywhere. The universe and each thing in the universe as in its existence and secret consciousness and power and delight, the indivisible divine in its entirety. However much the figure it makes to our mind may appear only as a partial manifestation. Now this is the thing which completes the experience. You see the bee not just as a part of the divine and the flower as a part of the divine. The bee is the divine entirely. The flower is the divine entirely. The perfume is the divine entirely. So momentarily we understand the concept, but when we try to picture it, something in the senses and the mind says, but How can it be entirely? Because the divine is infinite and the flower is separate from the bee. How can this be entire and that is entire? Right? So here he tells us what is it in the mind that makes for the sense of separation. He says the idea of quality, space, and division. So the quality that the flower expresses is so different from the quality that the leaf expresses or the bee expresses. The fact that the quality is different makes for us the sense of the thing is different. Now, as an example, if you take a child, or let's say an adult, okay, an adult, when he approaches his child, you see the quality the parent expresses, and then in his workspace, where he has to exercise authority or force to compel things against resistance, and you see a very different quality. Even it looks like it's a different person. He now meets his parents and a very different quality, a very different person. And so of clothing to match our role. In case you put on clothes which represent what you have to exercise there. You come home, you change clothes to represent what you're expressing there. Literally, from the deeper divine potential, it's this quality put out and that quality put out. But in the personality, which is used as a mask, the qualities tend to get embedded and stuck. If the personality was perfectly transparent, one quality and then another quality, and the person could change literally, not only in the quality of consciousness, but even the appearance of the form. Something of this we saw in the mother. And Sri Aurobindo comments on it, her body was sufficiently plastic to the consciousness that she expressed, the form of the body would change. Because people commented to Sri Aurobindo, how is it we see mother in the morning, afternoon, evening? She looks different. Even the face and the shape, form of the body even undergoes a change. Because the body was plastic enough. So we understand that if the masks and the disguises were completely plastic and transparent, then what comes through from the soul, from the divine as quality, would completely shape to express. They are not completely transparent, so the quality is as if bound in the plasticity of your body, rigidity of your body and mind. Gets a little stuck there, and there's some fixed patterns which stay stuck. We call that your personality or your character in the part where it's habitual. So in the flower, because the material is rigid, the quality that comes through takes on this particular form in the substance given. So it has a particular color, it has a particular shape, and a particular perfume. If you notice carefully, the shape, structure of the flower, the color, and the perfume are directly related to one common quality that it expresses. If you take a flower that Mother has described, collective harmony, I think, you will see there are many tiny pieces all arranged in a particular pattern, expressing that harmony. The shape and form, the structure itself is a representation of the quality that is being expressed. This particular flower is harmony. Another is psychological perfection. And the psychological perfection, Mother explained, is fivefold. And as it turns out, there are 5 petals. The flower which is Mother has named supramental sun because it represents that quality. You will see it has a particular pattern which catches all the essential aspects of what the supermind expresses, symbolically represented in its structure itself. Not only it is true of the structure, it is equally true of the colors, which also you will see matching, and the perfume, and its effect in the body if you ingest the flower. There's a particular flower Mother has named power. Interestingly, that is the flower traditionally offered to Durga. in Durga Puja because it represents that color, bright red. There's a flower which Mother has named courage, which has been found, this is part of the flower therapy created by somebody called Bach, I think 200 years ago, or I don't know, 100 years ago, who found certain flower extracts to have certain psychological effects. And the flower extract which he uses to overcome fear is exactly the same flower that Mother has named courage. Now, Mother did not look at Bach's system, she looked at the consciousness in the flower. Bach did not look at the consciousness in the flower, he looked at the effect it had when you took that. So, what I'm getting at is the essential quality that's welling up, and as it wells up, it acts through the triple mask of mind, life, matter. It takes on naturally the patterns which the quality represents, which becomes the form of the structure. It puts out in that, through the life energy, that particular energizing effect which corresponds to that quality, which takes on also the character of the perfume and the healing effect. And of course, behind it, the mental idea. All of these are expressing the quality. So what he's saying here is the distinction of quality in the flower, in the bee, in each object is for the mind a separator. But if you see the source of the quality, it is the same one divine in each one. But the mind sees the quality expressed, says this object is different from that. In discussion to its culmination, we would say essentially all quality, because it is the same divine within. You can, by a certain process of anything which is in the flower, draw out. Therefore, you can take sand, for example, draw out from it qualities which the sand. You can make it transparent, for example. You can make it conductive. You can make it semi-conductive. You can bring into it patterns of expression which represent intelligence, which is what makes for the computer chip. Now, sand earlier. Not only with sand, you can do it with any material, in principle. But the process of extraction of additional qualities actually changes the form, structure, and behavior of the object. Because finally, all the forms are an expression of the innate quality, right? So this is just to remind you of the deeper truth, because it is the same one divine in all things. Anything can emerge out of anything else. But as it is, the divine acts through certain priorities of what it conceives of itself as flower and bee, and you have this play. But our mind separates the quality, separates the space. The bee is here, flower is there. Therefore, they are different objects. Forgetting that the divine is one in both, and both are in the same one divine. And third, the sense of division, which to the mind is the only way. Unless this and that, I do not have any experience. If all is one continuum, I do not see anything. If the sky in front of you is a clear, flat blue, you'll find it very difficult to hold your gaze on a single point. Why? It's obvious. You need a focus to separate. Get a patch of cloud there, now you can hold your attention there. Otherwise you start wandering. The mind cannot hold focus unless it creates some separation. So the sense of division is needed for the mind to have any sense of reality. So these three things, we have to go beyond this idea of quality and space and division and see the infinite everywhere. Now, what does that mean? Within each thing you have the infinite quality. Within the flower is infinite quality, putting forward a certain pattern. But inside the source is the infinite quality, Ananta Guna. In everything is infinite quality, and the same infinite quality. All is infinite quality, putting forward certain waves and ripples of qualities. That's first correction. Second, space. This is here, that is there, that is there, this is inside that. All is infinite. So all is expression of one infinity putting forward the front. One way to conceive of that for the mind initially is to visualize the whole universe and the entire universe leaning forward to become the face of one flower. So when you see the flower, rather than saying flower is here, you conceive of the whole universe leaning forward and becoming this focal point projecting a front. So where is the flower? In the whole universe, putting this front. It's like almost like a puppet show. Behind is the real machinery. In front, it through strings, it puts forward one little thing, one little thing. So with my hand, I make, let's say, what's that thing? Two animals, creatures come, and that's my puppet show. But what's behind? Me. What's behind this? Me. Entirely me behind this, entirely me behind this. And I create the appearance of two different objects. Something like that with the flower. Behind it is the whole universe, supporting, leaning to put this little front. And behind the bee, again the whole universe, putting forward this front. So when bee meets flower, whole universe is meeting whole universe through this front of the puppet show. You see? Now you conceive of this. Where is the bee? Infinite. Where is the flower? Infinite. Putting up a front. And in the front you see a contact. When the contact is experienced by the infinite meeting the infinite. And you let that idea subside. Let it settle in you. And then begin to see everything as that. Very quickly there's a kind of a blurring. The distinctions, the narrow, rigid forms, they begin to fade out. And then the third thing remaining is the sense of division. We still had bee as a front separate from flower, which is a front. Some division was there. That goes away, and there is only one whole universe, meeting one whole universe in a certain play of qualities, of ideas of itself, meeting itself. And so for the mind it becomes kind of a blurry. But in the experience, which is seeing, you see only the play of the divine, infinitely playing, infinitely playing. And so when you see it like this, all you see is waves and ripples of bliss playing with waves and ripples of bliss, which is conscious and utterly real existence. And the level and complexity of the play is so massive. Everything is infinite, meeting everything else which is infinite, in infinitely finite, infinitesimal forms and appearances. And it's so complex, you're just overwhelmed by the grandeur and beauty of this vision. And it is seeing this that the Vedic rishis exclaimed, "Oh, the wonderful, Adbhuta." You cannot describe it. It is so extraordinary, so beautiful. You just enjoy the play and are immersed in it. See the infinite everywhere. The universe and each thing in the universe as in its existence and secret consciousness and power and delight, the indivisible divine in its entirety. The whole universe is the indivisible divine entirely. Every object in the universe is the indivisible divine entirely. However much the figure it makes to our minds may appear only as a partial manifestation. So in the mind you accept, all right, my mind is only seeing this, but in my some kind of a deeper intuitive feel, I'm aware that it is always the whole divine entirely. Each form, each object, and the whole totality of the universe is divine entirely. When we possess thus the divine, as the silent and surpassing witness and the active Lord and all constituting being, without making any division between these aspects, We possess the whole cosmic divine, embrace all of the universal self and reality, are awake to the cosmic consciousness. Now, this is the culmination of the experience of the cosmic consciousness. And this is the requirement that one has to have reached before one can say, yes, this is living in the cosmic consciousness. Now, you can see what he has done is he has led us through stages. First build this foundation, then develop this, then extend from there, this. And in the last, when we went into this kind of detail, everything just opened out. And at that point, he says, you're seeing the divine simultaneously in that poise where you first saw it as the witness supporting everything, and then you saw it as the active Lord from whom everything emerged and into which everything flowed back. And then you saw him as the all-constituting being, capital B. And between these three, there must be no division left now. He is simultaneously all three. Now, in this experience of all-constituting being, it is one divine person, being. That is this whole universe and everything in it. And at the same time, he is the originator into whom everything returns as the active Lord. And at the same time, he supports from behind his entire play. When these three merge, and you're seeing them as just one, then you possess the whole cosmic divine. Now, this merging of the three is taking place, again, as you saw when we were dwelling upon these earlier concentrations. Initially, the mind catches something, and then as it completes, you blur out the mind. Something feels, something perceives, which is no more your mind, almost as if an intuitive feel. The merging of these three stages of the divine all takes place in that kind of a consciousness. You're pushed as if on the edge of your mind's capacity. The distinctions fade out, and you're aware in a way that is not purely mental, more intuitive. You're aware in a kind of an identity. This is the beginning of the ascent of the consciousness beyond the mind, which culminates in what Sri Aurobindo calls the supramental consciousness, in which all these distinctions fade away. There is only that oneness and its multiplicity, and its infinite multiplicity without ever losing the oneness. Natural, that's your way of being. But remember, we started with the mind, and we saw the difficulties of the mind, but Sri Aurobindo leads us bit by bit, pushing that limitation of the mind until we actually cross that threshold. The mind now begins to participate as much as it can and opens itself to an ascending process in which the thing becomes more complete and more perfect through an intuitive awareness. But at this point, you're experiencing this in your normal, waking, active consciousness. So, we possess the whole cosmic divine, embrace all of the universal self and reality, are awake to the cosmic consciousness. When you thus see, and you live in that seeing, your eyes open or closed, you're still seeing the same reality, right? Awake or asleep, you are still seeing the same reality. You see? So somewhere inside one has the sense, even as the personality of the surface masks, undergoes the experience of sleep and even ignorance and limitation, the consciousness which you are identified with is always there, always free. And that's why this suggestion, when he says, embrace all of the universal self and reality, capital R, and are awake to the cosmic consciousness. It is always there. This being completing the discussion of what it is and how one attains to this cosmic consciousness. The next question is, what will be the relation of our individual existence to this cosmic consciousness? After all, we are experiencing that. We have not stopped experiencing this. What relation does it maintain practically? And we will see there, he will describe a series of relations where at first the two can exist almost like separate voices of ourselves, and then bit by bit they join until it becomes one. And that we will take up next Friday. For now, we can pause with this and just bask in the overall, we may say, vision of the divine that he brings us to. And we can take up any comments or questions. Mm-hmm.
Did you say that the Bach flower have the same quality as mother gave?
So I give one example of the Bach flower remedies, where we see an obvious correspondence between the meaning mother gave to the flower and the use of that flower in the Bach flower remedies. There is, of course. This is one which I know of. There may be others. But we also find that many of the flowers mother has not named, which are part of that system. So, and many which she has named are not part of that system. I am aware of this one, but everywhere else you will find a correspondence. Even in the Ayurvedic knowledge, you will find this correspondence. Yes, because that's the reality of things, the line. Even the physical shape of plants, flowers, vegetables, nuts, roots, the physical shape reveals to you the innate quality as it relates to the human being. So you'll see certain vegetables resemble certain organs of the human body. And you know at once that it has the qualitative character of what that organ does, and therefore can heal or strengthen that organ and its functioning. Very simple. See, in the walnut, you have the structure which is just like the brain. Even two halves and the linking in between. One would even say, if you went deep into it, in the portion linking the two halves, if you extract there, you'll find a preponderance of certain chemicals or hormones or whatever combination, which would correspond to the thing in the brain which links the two halves. Actually, you will find in quality a correspondence there also. It's very suggestive when you look at structure in this way. Yes.
One question. Does one need to leave behind the bliss of oneness in order to experience the bliss of unity? Because many of the yogas,
Yes.
they give
Yes.
a sadhana that aims at experiencing this bliss of oneness.
Yes. The question is whether we need to leave behind the bliss of oneness to experience the bliss of union. As we are, as human beings, we are already separate. So any experience of the bliss will be a bliss of union, isn't it? We are the part that is returning to the source. But it is in the divine consciousness that the bliss of oneness, as distinct from the bliss of union, would be distinguished. Now again, this is a way of putting it, because the human mind needs to put in a certain framework of space and time. So we have to conceive of a separation from the one which becomes the universe, a separation in space, and over time which unites in the bliss of union. But remember, where is this taking place? The separation in the oneness of the divine. Right? There's no real separation. So, in a sense, the experience of separation and merging back is inherent to the bliss of the divine as one of its possibilities that it must experience. And when it does experience that, you have the experience of the manifestation and the merging. You see, you have to think outside space and time, and at that point everything is simultaneous. The bliss of union and the bliss of oneness are simultaneous. In the part of the divine that experiences or concentrates on the union, there is this experience of the manifestation and the union. But you can think of it as an eternal truth. Both are simultaneously eternal aspects of themselves in the divine consciousness. Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the yogas that really just aim at
Yes, I understand. So in the experience of the yogas, the different yogas, whether they like it or not, they will still participate only in that aspect where, having been separate, you are recovering unity. The union aspect will be there. But in many of the yogas which seek to dissolve themselves in the source, the merging will take place and lose itself in that. Whereas in the yoga which seeks to manifest the divine, the union will take place and there will be a continuum in that union of the possibility, infinite possibility manifesting. And the richness of that bliss, of course, will be greater because it will continue to manifest and draw out. So, Mother speaks of the evolution having two phases. One is that phase where you are struggling to recover the divine. Once you have recovered oneness with the divine, she says evolution reverses direction. Now you become an embodied co-creator, to use a modern terminology, in which you participate in the divine manifestation, and through each one of us individually and among us collectively in that divinized consciousness, we will bring into manifestation further possibilities which have not yet been brought out. Because the divine is infinite potential, all that we can conceive of as possible does not limit what remains. In other words, all our conceiving falls short of so much more that can come which will surprise us. And then this conscious participation in the divine manifestation, the true revealed Leela, is when each one and all collective together, having both aspects, we bring forward possibilities which among ourselves we will say, oh, what a wonder, what a surprise of the divine revelation. You see? So there that bliss of that greater richness is revealed. But that is still waiting. Just nearby, just a little more. You know, these terms are also relative. When we speak of time and space, we can say, oh, it's far away. How far is the divine? Right here. In you. In all things. So how far is this possibility? Right here, waiting. Distance is only in terms of the gap we make in consciousness in our relationship with the divine. It's like you say, where is the divine? He's far away because he's sitting in that temple on top of that mountain. Then he's far away. But if it is that same divine here in your heart, he's, as they say in the Quran, they say, the divine is closer to you than your jugular vein. Well, the idea is, the very essence of your survival is the divine consciousness. How far is it here? And how far is that possibility right here? What is standing in between is the false identification we have made with the masks, the layers in between which create the sense of separation, and the habit of remaining stuck in the identification. It's only a habit, there is no other reason for it. But we entered into that habit willingly, because that's how the evolution began, by an identification with the self-loss. Remember covering your eyes, you chose to cover. And as you reveal and as you start searching, you're undoing what you yourself put on yourself as a covering. It's as if you choose to remove your own veils, at your own pace, of course. So each soul chooses its own pace of growth. Some choose to take a more rapid awakening. Some say, well, I will enjoy the slow way, no hurry. And so they choose to remain asleep longer, wake up slowly. That we are here, that the Mother gives us the chance to participate in this awakening, that we chose to come and participate in it because of the call felt, distinguishes these souls as having those who are being those who have chosen to find that fulfillment. The fact that you're here, the fact that you have chosen this spiritual path, is itself the assurance that you will attain to it. Because the soul chose what the soul chose must be. The rest is only a question of unfolding.
Well, for the realization of order, she has seen so many things which she said that could be in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, she said about Olympic Games and all that, in a very short time.
Yes, yes.
Which she must have known it's absolutely out of range. It will not happen, it's impossible.
Yes.
So why did she actually mention it then?
Mhm.
Of course, possibilities may be better, but she knew the reality would never match it. She has seen everything, just she knew how to do it. But I sometimes wonder why,
Yes.
because it was not in to be. It was clearly not to be. I mean, not in this time frame, maybe in a few hundred years, I don't know. But why this kind of
Yeah, it's a very important question for those who couldn't hear. She's asking why Mother mentioned specific time durations, like even having the Olympic Games in Oroville, but in 15 years, which appears so impossible even now. Even 15 years from now, it appears impossible. Okay, but interestingly, you have to see from the poise from which she spoke this, and in the consciousness in which she lived, all this which had to be had already been prepared and set. In terms of time, if the human resistance, we may use the word human stupidity, inertia, opposition, whatever form it takes, if that was transparent, it would have happened in 15 years. For her to declare that is unusual. You will see mostly Sri Aurobindo and the mother never speak of time frames. For the simple reason that these things can be variable depending on human participation. And rather what Shindo does, you will see he speaks of the sequence of events which are the markers. Once this happens, that prepares the way for the next, which prepares the way for the next. So you can see where it's going. So a roadmap is laid, but the roadmap is flexible in time. Circumstantially also the variations which he describes and how those variations link up. But Mother also, initially she would speak of things, for example, speaking of the past lives of people, and then she found it interfered with their personality and because they identified with it, she stopped it. In the same way, to speak of the future, it can be an interference or it can be an aid. So generally when she has spoken of the future and given a time frame, it was because that is the reality of what is possible, and by saying it, she puts a certain force to make it happen as early as it can be. By declaring at that point, when this is the possibility, to say it will happen after 50 years, would be to give it force to delay. And since her work was to maximize, she had to declare it for what is the ideal and the reality of the divine capacity. Missing element is, of course, the human. In the later years of her life, when already she had begun to withdraw, in the last 6 months she had begun the withdrawal process consciously. But in the last 1 month or so, we heard again from her attendant that she would ask him to force her body to make the exercises, sometimes going through intense agonizing pain, when the body shouting in pain. She said, no, I must do. He couldn't understand why. And she said, in the cosmic balance, it makes a difference. So that adventurous spirit of pushing through the last minute to the tiniest, because it made such a huge difference in the cosmic balance. That effort putting there, whatever the consequence to the body's distress, every little effort that she put had this enormous impact. So it had to be done, and she did. So in the same sense, when she saw this possibility, and this is what is possible for the divine to do, she gave it its full force. The result is, of course, in spite of human limitations, it will happen sooner because of that intensity of force put into it. But these things are always tricky. The mind can then catch that and say, oh, it failed there, therefore the rest also might fail. It can twist it around both ways. It's like when she said for India's freedom, it was to have happened in the 1920s originally. And there were certain individuals and forces which caused that delay, which of course led to a great distress. But on a spiritual level, it had been achieved in 1920. The British were on the negotiating table within 2 years. It could have been completed by 1922, 23, 24 at best. But then again, the forces intervened to delay, and the rest, the consequences of partition and all the rest that follows. In the same way, in the formation of Auroville, actually, this was told to me by one of the persons who had prepared the report under Mother's guidance, which was to be submitted to the, I think it was the Ford Foundation at that point. I'm not sure, but I think it was the Ford Foundation. They had agreed to fund everything. Now, if that had gone through, in fact, all this would have happened. But what happened in practice was, at the same time, somebody else prepared a separate report, signed with a different authority, and Mother's signed report and the other report went to the foundation at the same time, and they withdrew. They said, we don't want to get into politics. And the whole thing fell through. And then they took the longer route of going through a different process of raising funds. But in her consciousness, she saw all these things, and she had to always give the push for the best. The same with human beings. When she saw in a person a possibility, she gave the maximum push for that best to come forward, knowing all the possibilities of failure and delays. But because of that done, in spite of the delays, things will still happen in the shortest and least painful way. You see what I'm saying?
Whenever I watch your videos, I'm aware, but I don't remember anything after the video.
Yes. He says when you watch the videos, these classes, you're aware at that time, but afterwards you don't remember. Because there are different layers in your consciousness. You see, when you study a text like this, Sri Aurobindo shifts your consciousness. In the very act of reading and dwelling on what he is revealing, your consciousness gets interiorized partly and also lifted up. And so where you understand and experience is taking place in those layers which are not familiar to you. Afterwards you sink back to your normal state, which is more outward and lower, and the memory there does not retain the memory of this. You shift back into this, and suddenly, yes, what we had done earlier, that is also remembered. See? So the thing is, it represents a gap between this state of consciousness and the normal functioning surface consciousness. The trick would be to work to bridge it. What you do in this, as we move out of space, we try to retain our thoughts, keep them in that perspective, hold what is received as far as we can, dwell upon it again and again. Before sleeping, again sit down, if you like, reread the text, re-enter that vision, that experience, and then drift into sleep. Waking up, again you reread, dwell upon, draw back whatever you can. For the rest of the week, take up this piece of the text and repeat, reread, whatever you can, recall, re-enter the experience, until it becomes something living for you. And the result will be, in so doing, that state where you receive and this state where you normally function get bridged. More and more than that enters this, or your state in which you live shifts up one layer. And you're living and working in this state. That becomes your normal consciousness. And then next time when you read, he pulls you a little more. And then eventually that will become your consciousness. And that's how, in the process, the study itself lifts us and leads us into the experience. But it's a very valuable thing. Even to have awareness that you lose and you regain. The fact that this shift is taking place and it's strong enough that there is a gap is a good sign. Because it means in the receptive state one is opening to something much deeper, and now all is needed is the bridging. We can continue next Friday and close with a chant of Om. Om.